Coming up on Transformers University, we're just past the halfway mark of the original cartoon in Season 3, and we're about to tackle another 5 episodes right now on Transformers University. Hello, my friend, and welcome to episode number 75. Yes, we're 3/4 of the way to 100 of Transformers University. I am your host, Anthony Brucali, owner, operator, madman behind TFU.INFO, the website, the toy archive, the YouTube channel, and so much more. And I want to thank you all for waiting so patiently for this episode. We had a lot going on this October here at TFU.INFO, and here at TFU.INFO being me. We had New York Comic Con at the start of the month. And if you've kept up with the Twitter at TFU_info, you know I've made a number of guest appearances. I was on Transmissions Podcast's YouTube channel. I was on Mike Seibert Radio twice, once talking about Big Brother, the TV show, and once talking about New York Comic Con. And I was also on TFYLP's weekly recap show. So do check out all of those shows wherever you find your podcasts, because I know they're just about everywhere where I get my podcast, that being Apple Podcasts or iTunes or whatever it's called now. But I did not want to keep you waiting all month for a new episode. So we are going to get right into it. So we got 5 episodes we're covering this time around, and this batch of episodes features a number of new writers to Transformers, but not necessarily writers you might be unfamiliar with. And that's going to start with episode 16, overall episode number 81, Webworld, by Len Wein and Diane Duane. Let's talk a little bit about Len Wein. He is the co-creator of such superhero royalty as Wolverine, Swamp Thing, Nightcrawler, Storm, Colossus, and Lucius Fox from the Batman series. He was the editor on the Watchmen miniseries and co-wrote Giant Size X-Men #1, which introduced a lot of those X-Men characters I just mentioned. He would go on to write 5 episodes of Transformers for 4 different series, and that's counting the one we're about to talk about, up until his passing in 2017. Diane Duane is a sci-fi novelist and screenwriter, best known for writing Star Trek novels. She wrote 12 of them. She also wrote the Next Generation Season 1 episode number 6, called Where No One Has Gone Before, based on one of her novels. She's also written a ton of animation, including DuckTales, Batman the Animated Series, and Gargoyles. Now, for more on this episode, we're going to toss it over to one of our Patreon students. He's the one they call John Levengood.
Hello, everybody. This is John 4X Levengood here. I was requested by Ant to come back and do some stuff on this, and well, I chose to do Webworld. So the episode starts off with the Decepticons searching for Isodrite for their weapons. They find it and see that there are some Autobots there already, so they immediately start attacking the Autobots. During this attack, I get a giggle out of this little thing by Skylinks.
Eyes aloft, gentlemen! A rival geological survey has arrived!
Anyhow, to continue on, during the attack, Galvatron tends to be hurting his own side as much as the Autobots, as well as various comments and notes that show that he is not probably working on all 4 cylinders. Both the Autobots and Decepticons notice this, as well as whenever he's, and especially early on in the episode, whenever you see anything that seems to be like he's going a little bit different, you get seen some flashes by his temples and the. Anyhow, after the attack, the Decepticons look like they're back on Cybertron. Are talking. This is Cyclonus is talking with Swindle, Motormaster, and Laserbeak, And Swindle and Motormaster flat out tell Cyclonus that if you don't do something about Galvatron's madness, we will do something about both of you. Immediately after they leave, one of the Quintessons, through a hologram, tells Cyclonus about a planet that can help treat Galvatron. Essentially a space insane asylum. Goading Cyclonus into doing this. The Quintesson goes back and tells his compatriots that this could potentially destroy one of their biggest rivals, Galvatron. Cyclonus takes the bait and tells Galvatron that the Autobots are on Torculon, the planet that is currently where this insane asylum is. So he tricks him by telling him the Autobots are there, and so they fly off to Torculon. Once they get to Torculon, Galvatron starts seeing these cages, and he starts looking around, asking where the Autobots are. At this point, we meet some of the patients, is the best way to put it. Showing that this is indeed an insane asylum. One guy is sitting there with 3 heads, just saying, "I have no head."
I have no head. I have no head. I have no head.
In kind of a chant. Another alien showing that he's probably more youthful. His mind is more youthful, asking for mommy.
Mommy!
Another one that just speaking in Gabriel, and another one with more aggression. The Torculonians, I guess, come in and they discuss with Cyclonus what they need to do, and so they begin their treatments. And they go through various treatments. First one, talk about the issues. Another one, assemble a puzzle, and the third one, act out troubles. And in all 3 cases, Galvatron breaks out of his bonds and is generally destructive. And in the third one, they use a tolerance inhibitor array that Galvatron does develop a tolerance for, and this prompts the Alia solution, as the Torculonians go put it.
Once he is tied into the planetary computer, Torculon itself will enter his mind and disable the metaprocessor. The Alia will consume the damaged intelligence, and the planet will absorb its energy, including the madness.
He'll have no mind left. He'll be just a machine.
Aren't we all, in a way?
Just before they take him off to this treatment, Galvatron screams at them, "You have no right to change what I am." And then the Torculonians tell Cyclonus that they saved this treatment for last because it will cure him of his madness, but it may also cure him of being Galvatron as well. The complete disintegration of the metaprocessor, to me, struck as like a fancy talk for removal of a part of the brain responsible for personality, i.e. a lobotomy. And as a side note here, real lobotomies do change the personalities of some patients that have gone through them, whether surgically or due to an accident. So the Cyclonus says, "No, we don't want this. We don't want Galvatron to go through this treatment." And then the Torculonians capture the rest of the Decepticons and hold them steady and tell Cyclonus point blank, "What we do to Galvatron, we can also do to you." They begin the treatment, and Galvatron's madness actually feeds back into the planet, causing the planet to go mad, which is really interesting, I think.
Feedback.
Impossible!
The place is coming apart.
The planet's going crazy!
It's been infected with Galvatron's madness.
So when, this allows Galvatron to escape as the rest of the Decepticons to escape. They go and destroy the planet, and they actually do destroy the memory processor of the planet, essentially rendering the planet useless as a mental health institution. And it ends with the Decepticons flying off to go ahead and go after Autobots and destroy Autobots, without really curing Galvatron's madness, but give them all the Decepticons all an appreciation of who Galvatron is as well. Some small points of this episode. This is a very Autobot light episode, only seen very early on. And it's also focusing on how Second Command handles a mad leader and the what madness of a leader can do to inner ranks and stuff like that. This my personal thoughts on this episode. It's actually a surprisingly, for such a short episode, a surprisingly in-depth look at how mental illness impacts people, as well as the treatment options. And these feel a lot like treatment options of yesteryear, though I know some of them are probably used to this day. The real ones, not the Torculanians' version of them, like talking out your problems, acting out your problems, doing external work with your hands to focus your mind, things like that. Another takeaway I have of this on is, this is a good one to think about, is do we have the right to change somebody who doesn't want to be changed? Galvatron was fighting this the whole time because he doesn't want to be changed. He likes exactly who he is and the way he is. And albeit he being evil, if this was done to an Autobot, this would actually have been a very much more dark episode. But because it was to Decepticons, it seems to be that it was a more lighthearted episode. Some of it played for laughs right up until the end there. I have two sons with ADHD, and I have a couple nephews, one with Asperger's syndrome, one with full-on autism. So this particular episode, when I was given a list of episodes to look through and see which one I wanted to do, this one was the only one I remembered anything about, which is why I chose the episode. And I think, it's not like mental illness runs in my family, but it's there. I mean, if we were to go try to cure one of my nephews of his autism by drilling into his brain and taking it out, would he want to? Is that right? And that's essentially what they were doing to Galvatron. Now, Cyclonus was trying to stop it, so it wasn't a voluntary thing. There's surprisingly, the Decepticons were kind of on the good side to this versus the bad side right up until Galvatron freed himself. Then he goes to destroy the planet. So anyhow, it's just some food for thought. Just, look at this episode. It's for an 1986 episode, has a very, I would say, surprisingly mature look at mental illness treatments and what should and should not be done. Anyhow, thanks again. This is John 4X Levengood and signing out.
Now, if you want to catch John on his YouTube channel, you can subscribe to him over on YouTube. The username is 4x11gd. That's the word 4, F-O-U-R, spelled out, the letter X, the two numbers 1 for 11, and GD. And, of course, he is also one of our Patreon students, which means if you were one of our Patreon students, you would get this episode at least one day in advance, plus all sorts of extra goodies, like being able to participate in the show and know what's coming episode to episode. Now, a few things John didn't touch on that I'd just like to point out. One is this particular soundbite from the episode. And for me, this episode's one of the best Season 3 episodes overall. It's dark, it's Decepticon focused, which is very rare, and it's also kind of funny at times, including when Galvatron is admitted to Torculon. We find out that intergalactic medical payments suck just as much as real-life medical payments.
Does the patient have a service contract with us? Then we'll require a credit reference. I believe we can waive the customary deposit. Should the patient require permanent care, payment will be made in consciousness units rather than conventional currency.
What I want to know is...
Do you understand and agree to these terms?
Yes.
Then, if you'll validate the forms right here, and here for diagnostics, and for therapeutics, and one for parts and labor, and accounting, and there. That's your copy.
The other thing worth noting here is, one, Galvatron kills everything in this episode, but also Frank Welker's performance. He is unleashed in this episode. He's allowed to basically I wouldn't say chew the scenery, but he gets pretty damn close. And it is really one of his best overall performances in G1. Outside of maybe the movie, this might be his best single performance.
This Cyclonus is beauty. Devastation wrought with precision and care. It will take the Torculi centuries to rebuild. Only centuries? Are you certain? Then perhaps my work is not finished.
Now, going from what's considered one of the best episodes in Season 3 to one of the episodes that's considered worst overall. And that is Season 3, Episode 17, overall episode number 82, Carnage in C minor by Buzz Dixon. And for more on that, he's got your number. He'll steal your thunder. He's got your mother's maiden name tattooed on his arm. I'm talking about the Salty Seaman, Gabriel Owens.
DC sound attack! Let the rhythm hit 'em!
Hey folks, welcome to the Salty Seaman's review of Carnage in C minor here on TFU. This is one of the most infamous episodes, more for just, it's considered one of the worst episodes ever made, but in reality it's not as bad as, any other episode that, has issues, but some of the animation errors are just so egregious. It's a thing people remember. Also, the sing-song stuff. It's just, it annoyed a lot of people. There's a reason why this episode has such a bad reputation, but I don't think it's quite as bad as it's often made out to be. I haven't watched this in, 5-6 years. So it's been a minute, and I know which areas to hit on, but it will be fun just to look at this and just see how things, how bad really is it? Let's take a look, and let's take a gander at Carnage in C minor. So we start off with the Decepticons, which we see is the Constructicons, Soundwave, and Galvatron. Moving a planet, building basically a war world, and they're going to go attack a Metroplex with it. Right away, the animation is, it's very stocky. It freezes a lot of places, and right off the bat, we get Devastator standing next to Soundwave at about the same size. This is one of those animation errors types that we're going to continue to get throughout this episode. And famously, after we already see Devastator in full Devastator form standing next to Soundwave being about the same size, which toy accuracy-wise is pretty close. He then forms Devastator, and the Autobots attack, and the animation is just really shoddy and stocky. We see Brawn, who is, if you want to get into the whole, is Brawn dead or alive? This episode, he's clearly right there. We see Broadside just kind of pop up, and I know he kind of goes back and forth between, being about Ultra Magnus' size to being huge as a aircraft carrier transformer would be. But, right off the bat, just the animation quality is just crap. This was obviously done, haphazardly and on the cheap. But story-wise, it's going fine. Kind of a hilarious moment. Ultra Magnus goes and grabs Galvatron while he's in cannon mode. Kind of looks like he's polishing the old cannon there. He ends up making Galvatron destroy the engines, and then there's a scene where he's going "uh-oh," and Galvatron's just kind of hanging behind him, almost lovingly, two lovers in an embrace. It's this is why this episode is so well remembered for being bad. It's just funny as hell. If I stop every time I need to point out an animation screw up, I mean, I'm going to be here all day. So, but another one, the planet is going off into the deep depths of space and has about to run into a inhabited planet, which is our, where our plot starts. The Autobots go and attempt to stop it, and we see again some really awful animation. Magnus and Perceptor and a very tiny, weirdly kind of on model, but just it looks lacking of Superion, who just suddenly showed up out of the blue. Yeah, it's just like, what? Even as a kid, I gotta say, when I watched this episode, like, I caught a lot of these, just as a fan, and just like, man, they were really off on this. But I vaguely knew, like, this stuff happens. But geez, it's so noticeable. This is why this episode is so remembered. So our heroes land on the strange planet, and we get to meet some of the inhabitants who talk completely in harmonious sing-song voices, which are absolutely grating on the ears.
So much for me, I'm leaving.
No, you'll stay in the city.
Try and stop me.
Allegra, where are you going?
But we do get a fun moment. Another moment of, Soundwave, who, has a reputation of being kind of a cold, emotionless character, is obviously in love with the harmonics of this planet. This is a music planet. As grating it is to our ears, apparently Soundwave really loves it.
What was that?
That was heaven. The purest, most vibrant, most perfect harmony I've ever heard.
And then we get, Broadside shows up to grab Galvatron, and he is in, giant aircraft carrier guy mode. And later he will just be regular size, because that's just how this episode works. Then for the third time already within a couple minutes of this episode, the Constructicons form Devastator and are taken out by Perceptor's giant microscope mode blast, which is just, it's one of those, defeating purposes. The longer you've been around, the less powerful you get in Transformers world. And, this guy is, he's the original combiner. He's the original, whatever word you want to use for it. But yeah, getting taken out by Perceptor is pretty lame. And we randomly also have Hotspot standing behind Perceptor, who also hadn't been in this episode before. There's a lot of characters just randomly showing up. We move on to Soundwave gets blasted back into Galvatron. Galvatron's like, hey,
Get up. We're going to find the source of that harmony and use it against the Autobots.
Which leads us to a scene of one of the most famous egregious errors. Ultra Magnus holding two of the Constructicons like they were small children, and then just slamming them together and say, hey, we got to go track down Galvatron. He's trying to, use this planet against us. And, again, toy accuracy-wise, Ultra Magnus could have done this in the toys, but, the scale of the show that it, they should be, basically at his, chest area, not, tiny little dudes. But it's a funny scene. I really love it. If they had kept them that, toy accurate, I think I would have appreciated it more. But I just remember as a kid thinking, like, what in the hell are they doing? What is going on here? We get the Autobots chasing Galvatron and Soundwave into the main city of the place, I guess the cradle of this world's civilization. And Broadside goes through a couple of size changes, which is just normal for this episode. He transforms into his cargo ship mode, and Magnus and Blaster cling on to him in the first shot, and he's basically not much bigger than they are. And then in later shots, he's grown huge. And and Blaster also puts his 2 cents in, and is like, hey, this planet's full of cool cats. doing music that makes their thing work. We definitely got to stop the Decepticons, and in this plot line, I really do like. I think it's a cool idea. You got Soundwave and Blaster coming back from season 2. In a season that focuses on the newer toys. This is like a cool ep for these two. Playing into their musical backgrounds. And I really like this part. And Ultra Magnus, of course, is a stuck-up stodgy. It's just like, yeah, whatever, but let's stop the Decepticons. Whatever about the music. Also, Blaster isn't quite talking completely in rhyme as he ended up doing in the 3rd season a lot, which I always found annoying. It annoyed me in G.I. Joe when they did it with Roadblock. It's like, hey, the cool jive guy, who's kind of, let's face it, black. Or blackish, the robots. But I was like, oh, well, they have to talk in rhyme and be jive turkeys. And I just, even as a kid, I found that a little offensive. I wish they would, not have done that. But I'm glad to see here Blaster can talk normally. So the Autobots get to talk to the leader of this planet, who apparently his harmonic sing-song voice is translatable to Ultra Magnus, even though us as the audience can make him out. But only Blaster can understand them, and we assume also Soundwave because of their musical background, which is just another weird little bit of this very strange episode.
Is he certain all of his people would feel that way?
Anyone who doesn't can leave, just like Allegra.
Basso here says anybody who disagrees with him can do the big hike. Like somebody named Allegra?
Then that's who we want to talk to.
So while the Autobots are talking to the leaders of this planet and about Allegra and her whereabouts, and she, everyone figures out she is one of the keys to the harmonies of this planet. Galvatron and Soundwave are listening in, and basically, follow the Autobots and attack them. Knock them into under a pile of debris. Galvatron blasts them. At the same time, we get a little bit more of this, just how much Blaster and Soundwave are just so enamored with this planet. And I think that's like probably the saving grace of this episode. It's just getting like that little bit of characterization from these two characters.
Yeah. Beauty like you wouldn't believe, Broadside. Sweet soul music. It's their art, their commerce, their philosophy, their whole... Bummer. Galvatron and Soundwave are here.
We also get a lot of characterization on Broadside, who otherwise doesn't get any. He's very, biased tech spec. He's, he hates the sea, he hates the air, and his modes are, a ship and a plane. But he's very Sunstreak-like, worried about his paint job, his dents, and all that good stuff. The harmonious people, revive them out of the pile with their musical harmony power, and the Autobots are now off to stop Galvatron and Soundwave from getting to Allegra first. So Soundwave and Galvatron find Allegra and convince her to join their side to take out Basil Profondo, who's the lead guy, and she gives them her part of the harmony, which Soundwave gives us like the closest where everyone get to his orgasmic joy, which I just find delightful. I really do. Despite everything else in this episode, I really love how the boombox transformers are just so into this planet.
Soundwave, are you getting this?
But she says, I only have a third of it. Beso has the other one, and the little elf-looking dude has the other part. So Galvatron and Soundwave have to go fetch it from them, and the Autobots are on their way to stop this entire madness. So the Autobots show up. We see Soundwave use his third of the harmony to destroy a fjord. And they're watching, and we get the name of the elf-looking dude. It's Seabop, and he's the worst, subtle subterfuge guy of all time. He just starts yelling at Allegra like, "Hey, don't do that!" I'm not going to. I won't do that. It's annoying enough for them to do it, and having to hear me do it. But yeah, it's Galvatron recognizes that here's another guy with a part of the harmony, and he's going to attempt to get it from him. So Soundwave uses the harmony against the Autobots and Seabop, and Broadside is, for whatever reason, been swapped out with Hotspot. And while he fires back with his own part of the harmony, Soundwave, of course, records it, and now he has 2/3 of the sound, and they blast the Autobots away. And as the Galvatron and Soundwave celebrate their victory with 2/3 of the harmony, Galvatron laughs and gives like one of the most weirdly animated like head thrusts, as like ha 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 ha, but it's almost like he is headbanging. Like the tune must be to them a rock and metal bit, which of course I enjoy. So the Autobots end up in a fight with Galvatron and Soundwave, and basically Seabop falls down, and while Blaster and Soundwave are duking it out, Soundwave ends up falling on Seabop, which, I mean, honestly, he's like a 4 and 5 ton robot. He should be dead. And the Decepticons continue fighting back, and then they're going to go off look for Basso Profundo to get the third part of the harmony. And of course, Allegra uses her harmony powers to heal the very much dead Seabop, and it's described like how it's happening through Ultramagnus's mouth, even though it's obviously Blaster's voice. So the battle retreats back to the city where Basso Profundo is, and he's using a amplifier to use his harmonic powers against the Decepticons. And yeah, this is probably one of the bigger issues I have with the episode, is like these guys, their harmonics are supposed to be glorious and beautiful, and it's just atonal annoyance. And then we cut to suddenly, we've only seen Hotspot so far, but now we have Defensor. And then in another scene, we have Defensor standing next to Hotspot. Another infamous, error of animation this episode's full of. And it's just kind of funny. It's just like the whole thing, just like, what are we doing here, guys? There's parts of this plot I'm really enjoying, and parts of this plot I'm just like, no. So as Basso is fighting back with his part of the harmony, of course, Soundwave records it, and now he has the entire harmonic 3-piece section, and they leave from the planet to go to Earth and destroy Metroplex, and then on to Cybertron. So the Decepticons go to Earth, and they attack Metroplex with the harmonies. We see Metroplex, whose size is obviously off in various scenes. And the Autobots show up with all 3 of the original people of the harmony, and fight back against Soundwave using white noise.
How can they defeat our perfect sound?
With anti-sound, white noise.
And defeats Soundwave, and Blaster grapples with him and hits his erase button and erases his tapes. Yes, tapes. Soundwave says it specifically. Soundwave is still analog for whatever reason.
My tapes. You've erased my tapes.
And we end the episode. The Autobots are victorious, and they send back the Harmony people to their planet with a warning of, hey, you need to get your crap together, otherwise, this stuff's going to happen again. Anyway, yeah, this episode is, I said, it's famous or infamous, however you want to place it.
The infamous El Guapo.
What does that mean, infamous?
Oh, Dusty. Infamous is when you're more than famous. This man, El Guapo, is not just famous, he's infamous.
Just for the animation is just, it's really, really bad. Is it as worse as any other episode? If you want to count animation errors altogether, it kind of evens out, but just the errors are so egregious in this one. It's why it kind of stands out, along with just how atonal annoying the whole harmony thing is. But there's some fun bits to get in here as a fan. Soundwave and Blaster enjoying the music, a little bit of personality for Broadside. It's not a terrible episode, but it's not really good either. But it's definitely fun to watch. And, after the fact, said even as a kid, I recognize this episode was, has some bad animation in it. And normally I didn't even care about that stuff back then. But overall, kind of fun. I definitely enjoyed rewatching it, even just finding all the stupid little mistakes in it. And, whatever I didn't cover here, I'm sure Ant will cover in, his follow-up. And, that's all the Salty Seaman has for now. Check me out on my page, Gabe138, the Salty Seaman. On YouTube, you want to watch anything about military movies, lifestyle, all that fun stuff. I occasionally do Transformers, wrestling, MMA, tabletop RPGs, lots of different stuff. Mostly military, though. Anyways, that's all I got for you guys today. Back to you, Ant.
And, of course, you can catch Gabe on his YouTube channel, youtube.com/recharge138, or just search The Salty Seaman. A couple of things worth noting in this episode. It's kind of neat. This episode, watching it recently as opposed to remembering it in retrospect as just one of the worst episodes, there's a lot of animation errors. Some of them are hysterical, like Broadside falling on Devastator in aircraft carrier mode. That's how he defeats Devastator at the beginning of the episode. But the story itself isn't terrible. The concept isn't really terribly different than some of the season 2 stuff we've come across. Now, speaking of sounds and this episode, one thing worth noting is that the music for the score of season 3 shifts from the standard soundtrack to the Vince DiCola score from Transformers the movie. Now, it's not the entire episode, but you'll hear bits of the score within the episodes now, which is kind of jarring to the ear because it doesn't sound like the synths and trumpets of the main score. It fits. It doesn't not fit, but it's just something. If you know the movie very well, you'll pick up on it right away. Now, another soundbite, we've talked about Blaster and Soundwave having soundgasms, but we did miss one, and here is one of the early ones from the episode. Here's Blaster and hearing the sounds from Eurythmia.
Weapon? That was no weapon. That was harmonic bliss, a musical kiss.
Now, when Soundwave and Galvatron head down to the planet, they're flying. They're actually holding hands, and I never saw that before. And I'm going to have to pull that as a clip and throw that up on the social media because that one is certainly interesting. Now, for those of you who know music, it's kind of interesting here is that the harmony referenced from the episode is split into 3 pieces, and a minor chord in music is split into 3 parts, 3 notes, essentially. Well, most chords are 3 notes, but a minor, let's see if we can explain this without getting too musical. All right, so you have your musical scale, right? Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Those notes on the scale are a distance, a relation away from each other. So the first note is 1, the second note is 2, the third note is 3, and so on up until 7, and then 8 is the octave, same as the first note. In a minor chord, you have the first note, the 5th note, and then a flatted version of the 3rd note. So the 3rd note has a space between the 2nd note and the 3rd note, and the flat lives in that middle space. And so a minor chord is a 1st, a flatted 3rd, and a 5th. And so it's interesting that the chord, the harmony, is split into 3 pieces here in a episode called Carnage in C minor. Now, while that's interesting, there's this weird soundbite.
Zebot, no! You'll damage your infrastructure!
I wrote a big WTF on this because damage your infrastructure, it's just such a strange thing. We also get a soundbite from Scamper.
Alert! Decepticon attack!
Who said Dan Gilvezan did only Bumblebee. And of course, there's the final lesson from this episode, which is a good lesson overall for Transformers fans and general humanity, really.
You've got to learn to live with each other's differences if you're going to live in harmony.
And that's the name of that tune.
Now, as I said, this episode, it's not bad as it is remembered badly. The animation is really the worst animation probably of any single episode. But the story's there. The story's there. It's just poorly presented. There's some nice world building in here. I would really like to see this stuff get revisited, and I know it does in some ways. I've read up a little bit on the wiki, and we'll talk about that in a future episode. But you know what led me to wonder what exactly this episode sounded like in other parts of the world, because the titles for this episode were really interesting in other parts of the world. For example, in China, in the Chinese Mandarin title of this episode, the title is The Slaughter in C minor, whereas in Japan, it's called Challenge of the Music Planet. And I was really hoping for something weird and wacky and wild in terms of the Eurythmians and how they sound, but it wasn't terribly different. But presented for your enjoyment, here is a little taste of the Japanese audio of this episode.
小惑星ユーリズマ
もういいでしょう私も出ていくわ
さてここにいるのだ
いくら止めても無駄よ
アレグラどこへ行く
別荘へ行くのよ
And a big shout out to TFRaw and a big thank you to them as well for providing that audio for the Japanese dub of Carnage in C minor, Challenge of the Music Planet. And that takes us to Season 3, Episode 18, overall Episode number 83, The Quintesson Journal by Richard Merwin. Sometimes he's credited as Rick Merwin. It's the only Transformers episode he wrote. He did write a ton in the 80s and 90s, lots of cartoons, including Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, both the Sunbow and Deke versions of G.I. Joe, Inhumanoids, and he was the story editor on a cartoon based off the movies of Police Academy.
Come on! Stick 'em! Here they come! Yeah! They fight for justice! They stand up for the truth! They save us from the peril of a cowardly crew! They protect the rights of all citizens! When it's time to fight, they fight to win! Hooray! They're tested, tried and true! They keep the peace!
For you and me.
Hooray, the Police Academy!
Hey, somebody forgot to dot the I.
I'll fix it.
Police Academy, the series.
Hooray!
He also had a bit acting role as the cowboy surgeon in a video game. I guess you'd call it a video game, a computer game, really, called Terror Tracks, Trax, all capitals. I guess this was a series of games, and the game that we're talking about here was called Track of the Vampire. He's credited as Cowboy Surgeon. I could not find. I found the whole thing. You can search this on YouTube. The entire game is up there. I could not figure out who he was. I found surgeons. I did not find any cowboy surgeons. It's one of those kind of choose your own adventure games where there's a bunch of different outcomes. Fun thing here is that this game in particular was directed by Flint Dille, known Transformers writer, story editor on Transformers the movie, and it was written by Dille and Buzz Dixon. So there's a huge Transformers tie-in here back to Richard Merwin. Now, this episode premiered on November 11th, 1986, and that's going to be important when we talk about an episode later in this batch of episodes. And it starts with an explainer video about the war between the Zetaxis and the Lanark. There's a peace conference with Rodimus Prime and Spike. Then we find this canister floating through space like this, and it crashes on a planet. Of course, this is the Quintesson Journal. Now, Predaking notices the signal. Signal is a Quintesson frequency, and radios Cyclonus, who will join Predaking in the hunt for this. At the same time, Perceptor and Skylynx also notice the signal, and Skylynx follows the signal. He has Outback, Blaster, Steeljaw, and Ramhorn aboard and drops them off on the planet. Predaking decides he needs to start searching.
Must make more speed!
And then Predaking put on a black hat and started calling himself Heisenberg. Then Predacons decombine, and the Autobots find the canister first, but the journal becomes activated. Predacons arrive and attack, and Predaking fights Skylynx. The bots make off with the journal, and Cyclonus and the Sweeps arrive and give chase. Just then, Skylynx is pulled into a warp gate, which we have not seen since Five Faces of Darkness Part 3, and he's pulled through by a Quintesson tractor beam. The Quintessons imprison the Autobots and take the journal, but the Autobots escape and retake the journal. Skylynx is attacked by the Decepticons and injured, and the Decepticons get the journal and flee. At the peace conference, the talks fall apart, and we find out that the Quintessons have been delivering weapons to both the Zetaxans and the Lanarkans. The Decepticons, they examine this journal, and we find out exactly what the Quint plans are.
Item 457, Planet Tixlara.
This is it. The secrets of the Quintessons are ours.
A large fleet of Quintesson transport vessels were sold to Tixlara. The primitive nuclear fuel requirements drain the planet's mineral resources, bringing the Tixlaran economy under Quintesson control.
This is useless.
We supplied manufacturing facilities to the planet Alaxau. Said facilities were designed to create atmospheric pollutant imbalance. The resulting isotopic rains destroyed all vegetation, which we replaced with plantobots at a substantial profit. Item 793BQ, manipulation of the continuing war between Zetaxis and Lanark.
Are those not the two planets?
Between whom the Galactic Peace Council is attempting to negotiate a ceasefire.
A case study has been made of this conflict.
I'll bet they'd love to have that journal at the peace conference.
Then let's get it alone and bring it on home.
All right, on my signal.
Escalating sales of armaments to both sides has resulted in continuation.
Just then, Outback and Blaster attack, and the Quintessons steal the journal during the battle. The Autobots and Decepticons give chase, and the peace conference begins to fall apart. Skylynx attacks the Quintesson ship and gets the journal. At the peace conference, Rodimus Prime and Spike trying to keep the peace at the conference, and Skylynx arrives with the journal.
In the third stage, medium-powered hand weapons were sold to both Zetaxis and Lanark. Higher profit margins were not achieved until the sale of interplanetary weapons.
Unbelievable!
Profit margins? From blowing up our cities?
Fleet sales of warships increased profits by a factor of 5. Newer weapons sold to Zetaxis generated equalizing sales to Lanark, and vice versa. Quintesson profits from the Lanark-Zetaxis war have increased steadily for centuries. A textbook case.
We have endured these horrors so the Quintessons could profit.
Congratulations. It's taken you only a few thousand years to comprehend your folly. And we shall reward your perceptiveness by providing you your ultimate weapons as promised. Already armed and set to explode on impact. Are you ready to take delivery?
Look!
Skylinks, Rodimus Prime, and Ultra Magnet go to stop the bombs that the Quintessons have set and shoot the Quintesson ships off the course. Peace is achieved, but at what cost? And that is the entire episode of the Quintesson Journal. And this is a pretty good one. It's kind of your standard Transformers episode. We have a MacGuffin device in the Quintesson Journal being passed around, but we find out the Quintessons are kind of arms dealers / warmongers, more so than we knew from Five Faces of Darkness. We're kind of building on that. But we're also going to find out later that this plan is rooted in something much deeper. But first, we have one more episode before we can talk about that, and that is Season 3, Episode 19. Overall, Episode number 84, The Ultimate Weapon. And this one actually aired before the previous episode. This one was first aired on November 10th, 1986, and was written by Arthur Byron Cover. He wrote a handful of cartoons in his career, including Real Ghostbusters, Defenders of the Earth, and Bionic 6, and played Zombie Number 1 in the film The Laughing Dead. And again, that film is on YouTube in its entirety. I couldn't figure out who Zombie Number 1 is. I didn't watch the whole thing, but scrubbing through it, it seems really, really campy. Now, this one starts with some sort of war on Earth. There's windmills, there's old ladies shooting guns. It's very weird. I can't really give the scene justice in words. All I recommend is that you go and watch it. Rodimus Prime sends the Protectobots to stop the battle, and Rodimus Prime is also doubting himself as leader.
I've got so many responsibilities, I'm not sure I can handle them all.
But you're doing a wonderful job. Trust yourself more, and in time you'll realize you're every bit as good as Optimus Prime ever was.
Optimus Prime. Who could live up to him?
Just then, Galvatron, Cyclonus, the Predacons, and Combaticons attack the Autobots. Blades is wounded and rescued by First Aid. Rodimus Prime, Ultra Magnus, Steeljaw, and Ramhorn arrive as First Aid takes Blades back to Metroplex. The battle continues, but Galvatron wants to foreshadow.
And if my current plan fails, there's always my ultimate weapon. Nothing can stand in its wake.
Ultimate weapon? What are you talking about?
You'll find out soon enough, you and the rest of the world.
Back at Metroplex, Swindle breaks in and gets caught by First Aid.
So that's why the Decepticons are attacking this city. It's a diversion.
Yes, but now I have what Galvatron wanted. That transforming cog.
Put it back. Now!
What are you trying to do, First Aid? Talk me into surrendering?
That isn't a bad idea, Swindle.
Neither is this.
And this is the first time we hear about a transforming cog, what would later be known as the T-Cog. It's a very important piece of Transformers lore. It goes right there with their brain modules and their sparks as some of the most important pieces of their biology. And we also find out in this scene that First Aid is a pacifist. And he is much like Lifeline in G.I. Joe. In many, many ways, he was also a pacifist and a doctor serving in a military unit. Now, Swindle tries to swindle Galvatron in regards to giving him the T-Cog and gets shot for it. Trypticon's ready to attack Metroplex, and Metroplex is stuck in city mode because he doesn't have a T-Cog. And Trypticon's stomping through the countryside. Back at Metroplex, the Autobots decide to have a chat. Once again, we see Rodimus doubting his ability, but recognizing First Aid's strongly held beliefs.
If Metroplex fell because I refused to fight...
You're a medic, First Aid.
We don't expect you to compromise your beliefs.
I don't fit in with the rest of you. I'm not a fighter. I'm leaving.
Now, while stomping around, Trypticon decides to eat a monorail.
That's right, monorail!
And the Protectobots merge to try to stop him, and they merge without First Aid, so they are one-armed. It is a one-armed defensor jumping into the battle. The Autobots defeat the Decepticons and the aerial bots, particularly Silverbolt and Air Raid, take down Trypticon. Now, Rodimus Prime realizes he needs to convince First Aid to return to help fix Metroplex, and Hotspot volunteers to go have that talk with him. Rodimus and Magnus then decide they need to sneak into Decepticon HQ and decide to do so by having Spike and Daniel pose as delivery men. They also decide to don some new paint schemes. Rodimus is dark blue with teal and white decorations, including his flames, whereas Ultra Magnus is teal cab with a blue carrier. These would be great repaint potential for toys. Hint, hint, Hasbro, if you're listening. Vortex, who's guarding the base, doesn't believe them and shakes Rodimus Prime until Daniel falls out of the door. And he's falling through a pit, you would call it. Rodimus shoots Vortex as Ultra Magnus leaps and catches Daniel before he hits the ground. But they've succeeded in creating a diversion. Rodimus and Ultra Magnus lead the Decepticons away while Spike and Daniel try to find Metroplex's T-Cog. Spike and Daniel break into the Decepticon headquarters, and they find Trypticon's T-Cog instead and steal it. They get caught by Cyclonus, but Spike lies and convinces Cyclonus that they are just repairmen. Apparently, the Decepticons have a whole bunch of humans working for them or enslaved by them. It's very, very bizarre. Then we cut to a junkyard where we find where First Aid has been hanging out with a robot named Null A. And he, like me, is a Yankees fan. He does have this brown baseball cap with an NY on it. And they're chit-chatting before we cut back to the Decepticons, who are installing Metroplex's T-Cog into Trypticon. And it doesn't really work. We also find out that the Autobots plan to do the same. Trypticon stomps his way over to Metroplex, and Metroplex transforms with a little bit of comedy.
Hey, keep it down! This is a residential area!
We also see Metroplex getting stuck in mid-transformation, but he still fights back. Hotspot arrives at the junkyard to tell First Aid that they need him back and that only he can save Metroplex. First Aid returns to help, but needs to reprogram Metroplex's T-Cog. He drops into Metroplex and fixes him, and Metroplex then defeats Trypticon. Galvatron arrives and once again threatens with the ultimate weapon.
I still have my ultimate weapon, Rodimus. Surrender now, or I'll unleash its force upon you all.
Rodimus and Ultra Magnus realize that this is all a bluff, and the Decepticons flee, and First Aid rejoins the Autobots. And that takes us to the final episode we are going to talk about in today's show, Season 3, Episode 20, the big broadcast of 2006. And this aired on 11/12 of 1986, which is after the Quintesson Journal, but the events in the story, I believe, really do take place before that episode. This one was written by Michael Reeves, best known for writing the film Batman, Mask of the Phantasm. He was also story editor on Batman the Animated Series for 22 episodes. Like me, he is an Emmy Award winner for his work on Batman the Animated Series in 1993. He also wrote 3 eps of the 2003 Masters of the Universe series, plus 2 episodes of the original Masters of the Universe series. He wrote 19 episodes of the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series and worked on cartoons dating all the way back to 1975. He also wrote a number of Star Wars novels, and he also wrote 3 episodes later on of Transformers Beast Machines. Sadly, he currently has Parkinson's disease and actually wrote a blog about his struggles with the disease until 2013. Now, jumping to the far-flung future of 2006, we do need to talk a bit about some of the big broadcasts of that year. So the top-rated shows in 2006, the top 2 rated shows in 2006 were both American Idol, and the shows 3 through 5 were various airings of Dancing with the Stars. Coming at number 6 was CSI, and 7, Grey's Anatomy. The top-rated comedy of 2006, all the way down at 14, was 2.5 Men. Now, actual big broadcasts of 2006, we have in the United States, the Super Bowl XL, Super Bowl Extra Large, Super Bowl 40, with 90.75 million viewers. And worldwide, the World Cup had 3 billion, with a B, viewers. The Torino Winter Olympics with 2.1 billion viewers. And the final of the World Cup, Italy versus France, still in the 3 comma club with 1 billion viewers. Now, this episode starts with Wreck-Gar and a female Junkion watching TV, and the screen shows the American flag.
This concludes our broadcast day.
We will return to the air at 6 a.m.
Now, for our younger listeners, something you probably don't know is that TV used to stop at a certain time in the middle of the night. And this is kind of what they're showing here. So before infomercials, really, which was kind of a product of the late 80s, early 90s, before that, TV networks wouldn't run all night. They would run until 1, 2 in the morning and start up again at about 5 or 6. And they would roll the national anthem and then a test pattern of color bars overnight. And that's what TV was. I mean, when you were in an age of where the biggest markets had maybe 7 channels, and most only had 3, that's how TV worked. So that's what that scene is all about. Now we find out the Quintessons are observing, and they're looking to recover their journal, the one we saw 2 episodes ago. This is why I really think this takes place before that episode. And they believe this journal is on the planet of junk. So they send Sharkticons to Junkion to find the journal. The Sharkticons get caught and get shot at, and get into a pretty brutal fight. Wreck-Gar cuts off one of the Sharkticons' hands, and the Sharkticons flee, but the journal remains. We cut to outer space, where Skylynx gets attacked by Astrotrain. And they do this over the planet of junk. The battle is stopped because the Junkions decide to fire at both. Skylynx returns to report to Ultra Magnus and Rodimus what happened, and Astrotrain does the same to Galvatron and Cyclonus. We cut to the Quintessons and their secret plan.
The Earth programs, reinforced by our subliminals, are teaching the Junkions an intense distrust of all other life forms.
Now, the Quintessons decide to head to Junkion, disguised as a cloud. The aerial bots arrive, and the Quintessons attack. The Junkions attack too, and the aerial bots form Superion and attack the Quintesson ship. Superion's damaged, but the Quintessons flee. The Decepticons then arrive and attack, and Cyclonus figures something out. Back on the planet of junk, the Quints send the wrong signal.
To care is to share. To share is to care.
And the Junkions decide to retweet that signal.
Mrs. Peel, when needed, our 5-year mission to boldly share our signal with all the sloppy life forms who are our enemies. There is nothing wrong with your television set. We are controlling transmission. We control the horizontal. We control the vertical.
We got the touch.
And thus, a chain reaction of subliminal messages is spread across the galaxy, including a show that may sound kind of familiar.
And now, another exciting adventure of Space Age Jack. Let's get those lousy reptiles once and for all! Yo, Jack!
Now, Space Age Jack is definitely a spoof on G.I. Joe, but it won't be the first or last time we talk about G.I. Joe on this podcast. We've got the first Transformers G.I. Joe comic crossover coming up in just a few episodes. And that is the first of many. Those two lines, G.I. Joe and Transformers, are inextricably tied to one another, even up to today. But back to this story, we find a cat planet attacking a dog planet. Literal fight between cats and dogs. The Quintessons decide to sell arms, but they decide they also need to get that journal back to keep their secret. Cyclonus, what he had realized earlier, is that he needs to convince Galvatron to take advantage of the Junkions, but Galvatron is not interested. So Cyclonus takes the Sweeps and Scourge out on his own. We then find the Autobots flying to the planet of junk inside of Omega Supreme. Yes, Omega Supreme survived after Transformers the movie. I think this might be the only time we see him after Transformers the movie. He is certainly someone that we never really run into post season 2, but we're running into him right here, and so do the Decepticons. They attack and Omega crashes. There's a fight. Ultra Magnus repairs Omega, and that turns the tide. The Decepticons flee. They run into Galvatron, who is clearly brainwashed by some of the subliminal messages on the TV, and everyone heads to Junkion. The Junkions notice their skies are filling up.
Laser Wars! Nothing but Laser Wars!
And if you don't get that reference, that's from a classic Saturday Night Live sketch with Bill Murray.
Star Wars! Nothing but Star Wars! Give me the Star Wars! Don't let them end!
Now, the Quintessons are still looking for their journal, and the Autobots and Decepticons land on Junkion to fight it out. The Quintessons find the journal and pull it towards their shuttlecraft. Galvatron shoots at Rodimus Prime, and Rodimus Prime deflects the beam, and it hits the shuttlecraft, dropping the journal into space. Blaster reveals the subliminal messages in the TV programs that the Quintessons have been broadcasting, and the Junkions and Autobots fight off the Decepticons. The episode ends with the journal flying through space, and that's the big broadcast of 2006. And with that journal flying through space, it pretty much sets up the Quintesson Journal episode. Now, I haven't tried watching these in proper order, like one with the big broadcast before the Quintesson Journal, but I imagine it'll make much, much more sense. And that will do it for this episode of Transformers University. I am your host, Anthony Brucali, owner, operator, madman behind TFU.INFO. Now, if you want to help out the show, as I mentioned before, the best way to do it is Patreon. Patreon.com/TFU.INFO. For as little as $1 a month, you can get this episode at least one day in advance of everyone else. Plus, you'll get some inside track on all sorts of other things related to this show and TFU News and Views, bonus episodes, exclusive content. It's all there at the higher levels. For example, just recently, since there was such a lag between episodes, I did get to give everyone an advanced preview of this episode and the Carnage in C minor section from my buddy Gabriel Owens, the Salty Seaman. Now, you can find him over at YouTube. You can also find me over at YouTube, youtube.com/TFU.INFO. Swing on by. All of my Toy Fair coverage is there, including videos from all of the Hasbro events. I haven't posted any of the unboxing videos yet. I should and will. But the stuff from the Hasbro afternoon event of Earthrise and the preview of that toy line is all there. And, of course, if you're following us on Twitter at TFU_info, you can catch all of our coverage, our daily desk spots, our images of Siege Wave 5 toys that are just starting to show up but weren't out when we posted them. Lots of cool stuff going on over on the Twitter. And finally, if you like Facebook or Instagram, swing on by to facebook.com/TFU.INFO and instagram.com/TFU.INFO for all of our fun over there. Now, next time on Transformers University, we are going to talk about the stars.
Stars!
and do a little bit of conversation regarding 1986 mail-away figures. Something you won't want to miss, especially if you picked up this year's Hasbro San Diego Comic-Con release of Reflector. But until next time, I am your host, Anthony Bricali, owner, operator, madman behind TFU.INFO.